infrastructure, and we work with our partners in a way that they carry us, they make the sales of crude, and we get net back of exactly, after they carry, we get our own surplus. The final variable is capital to recurrent expenditure ratio. Base case, which is the current situation, remains at 20% capital, 80% recurrent. Moderate case, where we move the ratio to 40% for capital expenditure and 60% recurrent. When we get to optimistic scenario, we're actually going to move 60% or more of our revenues into a capital expenditure. Now, how will this work in real terms? As you get incremental revenues from driving tax administration, expanding tax base, reform of petroleum subsidy, all the incremental cash or revenues will go into capital expenditure and not recurrent. That's the way you get that kind of ratio. So you can drive the ratio to levels that will drive infrastructure. China, if I go back to my China story again, the last 20 years, we said, and Dr. Shuka said it as well, there are challenges that they've been in investment mode for the last 20 years plus. And now they're trying to see how they can move into consumption mode. Ours is the reverse. We've been in consumption mode. We were consuming when the oil price was over $100 a barrel. Now the oil price has come down to $40, and you saw the Morgan Stanley forecast. You might get back to $85 in 3 or 4 years' time, but you know, forecasts are forecasts. If we continue consuming even under a low price regime, well, I'm not sure many of us will be in a summit in a few years' time. Right. We then put all this into our model. And what are the quantitative elements of this assumption? So, for example, a tax to GDP ratio. Like I said, in the base case scenario, we don't do much change to the entire way we collect our taxes. But if we move to moderate, we will increase tax revenue by about 10% per annum. 10% per annum means that in 6 years compounded, you will double your tax revenue. Optimistic scenario, we said you increase tax revenue by 20% per annum. So in 4 years' time, you actually double your tax revenue. And you move your tax to GDP ratio from 6% currently to about 12%, which is still below benchmarks like South Africa. South Africa is somewhere like 15%, 16%. Brazil is 25%. And these are also large emerging market countries. Subsidy reform, base case stays as it is. If you do the things you will do in the reform under the moderate scenario, we will be able to at least reduce it maybe by 50%. But if you reform the entire subsidy scheme, you end up with zero subsidy. I want to talk about recurrent capital expenditure ratio and GV cash cost funding. Like I said, these are just numbers for illustrative, and these numbers were put into our model. Now, what did we get? This is an illustrative output. I'm not here to take questions on the model, and the model is only purely for illustration. Right? I'm not here for you to throw bullets at me for policymakers in the audience. It's purely for illustration. What I want us to focus on are the policy options. Okay, so we'll get to the policy options in a minute. Just bear with me. All right, bear with me. Right. So these numbers throw up the output. So you put in the input, you put in your multipliers, and you get the output. And of course, look at base case. The output is not too far dissimilar from our current situation. Okay. Moderate, you saw things like unemployment rate begins to improve, poverty rate begins to improve, literacy rate begins to improve. And of course, optimistic is where you have much higher GDP growth rate, much larger GDP. And of course, as you know, we had this target of getting to $900 billion by 2020 or 2025. We'll be on that path to be able to achieve that number. Now, like I said, let's go away from the model now. Let's go back to the policy options. Now, on the base case, I'm not going to give you any policy options here because we've heard Dr. Shekara talk about the current situation. The base case is the current situation, and he has already given us the detail of exactly what the current situation will do. In a sense, it won't move us much further from where we are today. Moderate case, again, these are examples of what the policy options could be in a number of the key sectors I'm picking here. I'm just picking these 3 areas because they're areas that we can relate to: education, healthcare, infrastructure. There are other areas, there are other things in judicial reform or security, but I'm just going to focus on these 3 areas. Education, the target will be to spend between 10 to 50% of annual budget on investment in education. 10 to 50%. I think today, I think we'd probably do 6%, if I'm correct or wrong, last couple of years. We'll promote effective use of innovative teaching methods and materials in schools. adopt a merit-based education system that will be based on performance, skills, and competencies. Now, in some of these areas, we'll have to do jointly with private sector. Private sector does this every day in the schools that they run, which is why the output of those students get into the best universities, whether in Nigeria or anywhere else in the world. You go to a public school, sit on the board of a public school, and ask the principal, and last year, the students who did NECO or WAEC, where are they today? I'm on the board of a missionary public school. I've been there for the last 4 or 5 years. When I ask the principal, he has no clue where those students are after they finish the exams. So the output of that system is not producing leaders of the future, leaders who will be in this room in 20 years' time. We're producing leaders who will be on the streets, who will be, candidates for the kind of things we're hearing happening in Northeast. Healthcare, increased number of physicians from 19 per thousand to 100 per thousand. What does it mean? You've got to put more money into medical schools. You've got to reverse the brain drain. You've got to do the things that will encourage youngsters to say, I want to be a doctor. Increase national health expenditure per person per annum to about 30,000 naira per annum. Still a low amount, but it's a start. Infrastructure. Beyond your traditional fiscal allocations to infrastructure, provide credit guarantees to attract long-term funding to infrastructure assets for the initial period of investment, because there's a risk around infrastructure. You're building Second Niger Bridge, you're doing a highway. Investors want to say it's based on traffic studies, based on traffic forecasts. Supposing the traffic forecasts don't actually play out the way they ought to be. Okay? So I'll give you a guarantee. For the first few years, once the traffic forecasts actually exceed what was in there, in fact, you need to pay me for giving that guarantee. If it falls short, then I can give you top up to ensure that we can actually drive the traffic on that road. Increase the paved road network from 5,000 kilometers to 110,000 kilometers. But of course, we have to decide, where are we putting that paved road network? Does it move goods and services? It's not a road to the end of nowhere, but it's a road that is going to move goods and services in an efficient manner, such that the farmers can get their products out, manufacturers can get their products to the right markets. Increase power generation to achieve 10,000 megawatts and above. Let's go to the optimistic case. Again, the three same areas: education, healthcare, infrastructure. For comparison, you can see that each of these scenarios are incremental to the earlier one, so that you know that at least we are moving the entire framework to a point where we can actually see drive growth. And I'll show you the result in a short while. Education, increase budget allocation to 20% of your budget. 20% is the benchmark for countries that are seriously investing in education. And they invest in education because they say 0.5% additional investment in education actually adds, a large amount of people to the pool that will be available in 30 years to drive your skills for a country that wants to grow at a rate of growth of 8 to 10% per annum. So 20% is a large number, but if you go and check those countries that have done so, go and look at their results. The results today are staggering, which is why when you see them that they have skills, or in fact excess skills, then it's because of the investment they made in that sector years back. Raise the quality and standards of our universities to redress the outflow of students to foreign countries. The quantum of Nigerians who are studying in foreign countries is unimaginable. Go to our neighboring country, Ghana. There's a particular university there where they say 6 out of 10 students are Nigerian students, because they know that this campus, the terms will start and finish on a particular date, and the lecturers will be there when they ought to be there. Increase the investment in vocational education through establishing technical colleges and centers around the country. This particular concept here, if you look at our social infrastructure, we have primary schools and secondary schools. They open from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. At 2 p.m. they shut down and they are left idle to the next day. What says we can't use the same social infrastructure facilities to do vocational centers that will start at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to 7 p.m. in the same infrastructure? So we're optimizing the use of that infrastructure. When we say vocational schools, it's not about building new schools. It's about using the existing infrastructure we have to actually put students through this system, and then we create tilers, carpenters, bricklayers, plumbers, electricians, such that the construction industry has the pool of labor that will drive construction. Healthcare, provide tax incentives and government-funded research grants to local manufacturers of pharmaceutical products. A country cannot grow if you don't invest in research and development, whatever sector of economy. You just can't grow. You cannot reinvent yourself if you don't invest